Welcome to our story. Last week, you'll recall that we read the story of the conquest and settlement of Canaan, the promised land, beginning with the leadership of Joshua taking the people across the Jordan River and into the promised land, where for 200 years they would be led by charismatic figures called judges. Remember, the judges weren't people who sat behind the bench in a long black robe making decisions. The judges in this period of Israel's history were charismatic leaders that came to the aid and the rescue of Israel during times of national crisis. They were really deliverers. But they weren't kings or queens in any sense of the word. A judge would step forward in a time of crisis or battle, and then when that battle was won or over, the judge would go back to doing whatever it is they did. During this period of 200 years, Israel fought against many formidable foes. One of their most difficult rivals, and arch rivals really, were the people of the Philistines, sea people who had advanced weaponry, sea peoples who were certainly a formidable opponent for the people of Israel. Israel, the people, began to call for unity among the tribes as a way of survival. They believed rightly that the people would be stronger against foes like the Philistines if they were united as one. They looked around at the kingdoms surrounding them and saw that all these other kingdoms indeed had kings. They did not, and they began to cry out to their priests and to the judges and to God for a king. Samuel is the last of the judges. He's also a priest. He tells the people that their request isn't a very good one. He warns them of what they can expect if they have a king. A king will lay the burden of taxes upon the people. A king will conscript their young men to service. And besides all that, Samuel tells them, remember, our king is supposed to be God. We're living in a nation of God's people, and we have no king besides the Lord. Yet the people continue to ask for a king, and God gives them what they want. In 1020 BC, the first king is anointed by Samuel. His name is Saul. After Saul came King David, and after King David came King Solomon. And this period in Israel's history is known as the United Monarchy, a 100-year period from 1022 BC to 922 BC, where the people of Israel live united under a single king. It's a fascinating time in Israel's history. As you read from the books of Samuel and Kings and Chronicles, you're reading during this particular period of biblical history about a united monarchy. One of the fantastic things to consider are the lives of the kings themselves. We think of King Saul, who started out well. The Bible tells us that he was handsome and a full, head and shoulders taller than everyone else, and a person that others would follow into battle. And Saul has a great beginning, but somewhere along the line he becomes disillusioned. He begins to take on power that really has not been given to him. He does some things we don't understand, like consulting a witch and having a seance. Instead of going to God in prayer, he looks to the dead for guidance. Some strange things such as this lead to Saul's demise. We hear of King David, who begins as a very young person. He's a scrappy fellow from the very beginning. When we meet him, he slays the giant Goliath and wins this monumental victory against the Philistines, and he becomes wildly popular among the people. David, of course, a passionate man, also has some terrible problems and is seen to have some of the same sinful tendencies as the rest of us fallible human beings, in his awful affair with Bathsheba that leads to, my goodness, this part of the Bible reads almost like a soap opera, where David keeps trying to just cover up his mistakes. Instead of going to God and saying, I'm sorry, he tries to cover up the mistakes, which leads to murder and the death of many innocent people. It's a terrible time in Israel's history. Yet David in Psalm 51 goes finally and asks for God's forgiveness after the prophet Nathan tells him that he's accountable to God for what he's done. David recognizes and repents. David's son Solomon is a king. Solomon is a wise king, and yet it's easy to see that Solomon got carried away with his grandiose ambitions and began to see the kingdom of Israel as a geopolitical empire rather than as a spiritual nation. It's true that under Solomon's reign, the nation of Israel has greater geopolitical power than they ever had and ever would in history, all the way from the Euphrates River all the way down to Egypt. They controlled pretty much the entire eastern side of the Mediterranean. And yet, Solomon does some crazy things too. He marries something like 700 wives and 300 concubines, and has political marriages, arranged marriages for political clout and power among neighboring nations, and does some things that maybe politically are good moves, but religiously they're a disaster. Some of these things lead the people into apostasy and worship of foreign gods and goddesses. And by the end of Solomon's reign, the northern tribes are so disillusioned with the monarchy that they secede. And in 922 BC, we have the formation now of two nations, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. Remember this division, because the reading of the prophets and the reading of the rest of the Bible during this time period won't make sense to you unless you remember that we're now talking about two distinct nations, Israel in the north, Judah in the south. Fascinating time in the history of God's people. Marvelous to look at God's faithfulness even during a difficult time.